talk about narrative writing. Narrative writing is basically just story writing. Narrative is just a fancy word for story writing. So don't feel scared when you see narrative writing. It's the same kind of writing that you've been doing all your life since SEA. So it basically tells the sequence of events involving characters, setting, conflict, climax, and resolution. Characters are the people in the story. The setting is where the story takes place, when it takes place. Conflict is the problem in the story. Climax is the point or the peak of action in the story, the highlight in the story. Resolution is how the problem is resolved. We will talk about these things a little bit more in depthly. In CSEC English, your narrative writing tests your ability to do several things. It tests your ability to tell an interesting story. The examiner does not want to read any kind of boring stories. They also want to ensure that you keep the story relevant to the topic. Maybe you're looking at that picture where the child in the ocean holding on to the rocks, and you start off your story nice and good and thing, but because you didn't plan out your story well, your story reached somehow about the child in the jungle, right? No, you would lose a lot of marks for that. You need to keep the story relevant to the topic or relevant to what you already started writing. You're also being tested on how well you could organize the events clearly. If your story is mixed up and confusing, you will lose marks. Writing a flashback is a very good technique to use. Many people use flashbacks as a technique. But if you write a flashback and you don't indicate that it is a flashback and that you're coming back to the present, your reader will not understand what is going on. It will seem like your story is in a sort of random timeline and nobody could understand it. You will lose marks for that. So if you're writing a flashback, you need to indicate that it's a flashback in some way. Use good vocabulary and sentence structure. If you just start describing your characters like, okay, well, Janice is brave, Tom is tall, Jack is fat, and you're just describing people in a very flat 2D way, or you're setting in a very flat 2D way, you will lose marks. You should make it interesting. Use different words. Instead of saying John was tall, you could say he was the height of a skyscraper, right? So you could just find interesting ways to describe your characters. And also, using good vocabulary means using the appropriate or the correct vocabulary for that location. If you are writing a story and you start using a bunch of random words that not making any sense in the locations where you put them, you will lose marks. Sentence structure. So you want to have a variation of sentence structures and sentence lengths. You don't want that you only write in 3-word sentences for your whole story, or that your whole story is just long sentences. Your reader might get bored of that. You need to have a range of them. And also you want to make sure that your sentence structure is correct. You don't want that your words in different locations or in the incorrect locations. So you want to say she had a big red ball. You don't want to say she had a ball big red, right? That is, you will lose marks. That is not correct. You're also being tested on how well you can create realistic characters and situations. It is, yes, you can write a story about dragons and all of that, but you want that your story is realistic in the sense that it seems like a real situation that would happen. You don't want to write a situation or a character that seems too good to be true or too out of the ordinary. Somebody who only has good things happening to them and has no kind of downfall or conflict will end up being a very boring and 2D story. You're also being tested on how well you could engage the reader and make them want to continue reading your story. You don't want that the examiner just read the first paragraph and say, look, this boring, I'm not wasting my time. Just get a person like a 10 out of 25 or something. Now, a good narrative is not just what happened, but it is also how the story is told. Right, so what happens is just the events of the story. But that is not all the story is. So you don't want to write that I wake up this morning, I went to do my exam, I forgot my test papers, I forgot my study notes home, I called my mother, she brought it for me, I went, I did my exam, I passed my exam, I went back home. Yes, all that is what happened in the story. But if you write a story like that, nobody wants to read a story like that, right? That's very boring. So you need to describe each section of your story. You need to add suspense and the different elements that would enhance your story. Now let's look at the main features of narrative writing. So in narrative writing, you have the plot. The plot is the series of events that happen in a story. It is the way the story is organized from beginning to end. A good plot does not just tell random events, instead the events are linked and each part helps the story move forward. So, the list of events I gave just now about writing the exam, that falls under the plot of the story. But if you don't link them together and show how they evolve, then your plot is very flat. When you want to write your story, you need to think of the plot as the roadmap. So it shows what happens first in the story. So first I wake up. What problem arises? I forgot my study notes home. How the problem becomes more serious. Maybe I wasn't getting through with my mother on the phone. Then the most important turning point is when she finally answered, but she said she was in work. Now how everything ends, maybe she agreed to go home and pick up the study notes and bring it for me in school. So, a proper plot has three parts: the introduction or exposition. This is the beginning of the story. It introduces the reader to the important details needed to understand what is happening. In the exposition, we usually learn several things. We learn who the characters are. So this is the very first paragraph or the very beginning of your story. Tell us who your characters are. So you need to introduce us to the characters. You can tell us their names, you can tell us something about them, tell us what it is they are experiencing. Also tell us where the story is taking place. So this is the setting. It might be in a school, at home, in a mall, in a haunted house, different places. When the story takes place, maybe it is happening in the 1950s. Maybe it is happening yesterday morning. Maybe it happens 2 years ago. Different things like that. Maybe it's at night. And what the main situation is. So, is the main situation that I was locked in a haunted house? Is it that I had to go and look for the treasure buried under the lake? Is it that I forgot my pencil or my study notes home? So whatever the main situation is, mention that. So this helps the reader to settle into the story. For example, we have Karim, a Form 5 student from San Fernando, was always known for being punctual. On the morning of his social studies exam, he left home early, confident and prepared. So here we are introduced to the main character, who is Karim. Also, the setting is that it is happening in San Fernando, and when it is happening on the morning of the exam. The situation is that he is going to write an important exam. Now, the rise in action in your story is the next part of the plot. So this is the part where the main problem begins or the main problems arise. The story becomes more interesting here. Here the tension starts to build because something goes wrong or a challenge appears. So some types of rise in action could be obstacles. Maybe I am late for my exam, but there's a lot of traffic, so there is something in my way preventing me from getting to what I need to do. Maybe you have misunderstandings. So you walk into class, you didn't walk into class and say good morning to your teacher. Maybe you just rush into class and you sit down quick and pull out your pen and your book. You didn't even notice your teacher sitting in front. So your teacher assumed that you were disrespectful and started yelling at you and sent you to the principal office. But it's just a big misunderstanding because you really and truly just wanted to start your exam and not really notice your teacher was there. Maybe you have a conflict. You have a student who is jealous of you in the exam because you are the smartest student in the class. So the other student pretends that you cheating from them or copying their work. So they tell on you and they get in trouble there. Surprising events. Maybe when you reach to school, you realize that nobody is in the classroom. You don't know where the exam is taking place. Complications that make the situation worse. When you reach the exam, you sit down. When you're reaching for your pencil, you have no pencil, no pen, you have nothing. So you need to either figure out what to do or ask to borrow somebody's pen. So the rise in action could be various things in your story. It's whatever you want to write on. So this is the part of the story that keeps the reader interested because they will want to know what is happening next. For example, on his way to school, Karim realized he had left his examination slip at home. When he tried to call his mother, his phone battery died. Then heavy traffic slowed the taxi and panic began to set in. So this is the rise in action in the story because here we see problems start to arise. First problem is that he left his exam slip at home. Second problem is his phone died. And the third problem is that there is traffic slowing the taxi, making him late. So the more problems that arise in your story, the more interesting it will become because your readers will feel more in suspense. They will want to know more and more, well, what is boy going to do or what is his character going to do to overcome all of these problems? How are they going to deal with everything? But that is not to say that you need to write only conflict in your story and like you write your whole story is just conflict and you have no resolution. Or you write so much conflict you cannot resolve all of it. You only have 400 to 450 words in your exam to write. It sounds like a lot, but when you start writing your story, you will realize a lot of those words go into narration and description. And you don't want to write too many problems so that you can't resolve them. Write just enough where it is suspenseful, it is helping the story to progress or move forward, but it's also just enough that you can resolve them at the end. Because all you want to do is to create suspense and create tension in your story. From there now, you have the climax. The climax is the most exciting or dramatic or important moment in your story. It is the turning point where the main conflict reaches its highest point. So at the climax, the character usually has to make an important decision. The biggest confrontation might happen, or the reader feels the greatest amount of suspense. So for example, just as the school gate was about to close, Karim saw his mother running toward him with the examination slip in her hand. He had seconds to decide whether to give up and go home or make one final dash to the office. So maybe it's like an hour or 30 minutes into the exam. He already late to the exam. He has lost 30 minutes that he cannot get back. So when his mother arrives at the gate, he has a big decision to make. Will he go into the exam and continue writing it despite being a half an hour late and losing so much time? He might even finish the exam. Or does he just say, okay, well, I will go home and come back and write it the next day or next time? So that's a big decision he has to make. Then after your climax, or right after your climax, comes the fall in action. This is where the major problem has started to be resolved and the story begins to move towards the ending. So the fall in action, the effects of the climax are shown. The tension begins to decrease and the reader sees what happens next. So, using the same example, Karim rushed to the office, handed over the slip and was allowed into the examination room just in time. Though still shaking, he took his seat and opened the paper. So this shows what happened after the big moment of deciding whether or not he should go to the exam or go back home. He decided to go. So that is part of the climax. That's part of the fall in action, and he was let into the exam. Then you have the resolution. So the resolution is the ending of the story. It is where you have the final outcome and ties the events of the story together. So the resolution may solve the problem completely, show what lesson was learned, explain what happened to the characters in the end. It must make the story feel complete. You or readers for the CSEC exam in particular should not feel like something is missing from the story or want that something else is supposed to happen, because that is the end of your story during the exam. You have no chance of writing anything extra. When people write books, yes, they could have cliffhangers, because, well, you write a cliffhanger and then you write a next book to explain what happened after that. But in the CSEC exam, you can't write anything coming after the end. You don't have a part 2 to the CSEC exam. You only have one. So you have to end off your story. Don't put a cliffhanger, because it's very difficult to write. And it might feel like your story has not ended, and you might lose unnecessary marks in that way. So now after the exam, Kareem promised himself never to leave important documents unchecked again. The frightening morning taught him that preparation meant more than just studying. So this is the end of the story here. He went into the exam, he did it. After the exam, he just promised never to leave home his documents again. So it gives some kind of outcome, which is the lesson that he learned. The lesson is preparation is more than just studying. When you prepare for your exams, you also need to prepare all your documents and organize your things the morning of the exam. So just a short example of the plot structure here. The exposition might be a girl is preparing for a school debate. The rise in action might be that she lost her speech, her partner is absent, and she begins to panic. The climax is that she is called to the stage and she has no notes in her hand to do her speech. Then the fall in action is that she speaks from memory and gains confidence as she continues. The resolution now is that she wins second place and learns to trust herself. Now let's move into the setting. So the setting of your story is basically just the place, the time, the surrounding conditions in which the story takes place or happens. So it tells us where the story takes place, so like the location. It also tells us when it takes place, might be the night, the morning, the 1950s, and what the environment is like. So if it is a haunted house, you might describe like the creaking wood that you're walking on. You might describe the cobweb. You might describe how dark and gloomy the place is, or all the shadows on the walls, different things like that. So things that your setting includes. It includes the place. Places, for example, would be the village, school, a beach house, the town, the forest. What time? So like morning, lunch break, rainy season, long ago, things like that. The weather. Maybe it's raining, sunshine, storms. The atmosphere or the mood. So this is whether it is cheerful, spooky, crowded, peaceful, and the surroundings. So you have to talk about the sounds that you hear, the sights that you see, the smells that you smell, people, the buildings, the roads, the seas, the trees, all of those things. When you're writing your setting. When you're writing a story, think of it as a written version of a movie. The way you could sit and watch a movie and understand everything that is happening, you understand exactly where the movie is taking place because you could see everything. You understand what time it is in the movie because you could see whether it is daylight or nighttime. You could see if it is something happening in the 1950s. You could see all of that in a movie. In a story, you can't see it because it needs to be written for you to see it. So when you write a story, your aim must be for the reader to be able to imagine that in their heads. It should play like a movie in your mind when you write a story. So you must add all of the necessary descriptions for your reader to understand how the characters are feeling or understand what is happening. So we're going to talk about that down here now. But first, the setting is important, right? Because it helps the reader to picture the scene. It helps them to make the story feel more real and believable, creates the mood, affects the characters' actions, and helps to shape the events. So some examples of setting. If you want to write about your story taking place in a village in Trinidad during heavy rainfall, things that you need to mention would be the wet roads, the dark clouds, the flooding, people rushing for shelter, and it will also have a serious or a tense mood. So an example sentence would be, the narrow road in the village was covered in muddy water as heavy rain beat against the rooftops. So when you use words like, descriptive words like muddy water, we didn't just say it was covered in water. We said it was covered in muddy water. So now your reader could visualize what color the muddy water is. I could now see that the water is brown. Before, when you just said the road was covered in water, it might just be clear, clean water. But now that we know it's muddy water, we could see that. We also use the word narrow to describe the road. If you just say the road was covered in water, I might be thinking about a road as big as the highway, covered with just clean water. But we want to describe that it is in a village and the road is small. So you have to use adjectives to describe your setting. Our next example, we have a school corridor during lunch break. So this setting suggests that you might have a lot of students, you might have noise and confusion, laughter and conversation, movement and excitement. So our example sentence is, the corridor was packed with students laughing, chatting and hurrying to buy food before the bell rang. Think about what a school corridor would look like. When you're walking through the corridors in the school during recess or lunchtime, it is never quiet. You don't see students sitting down quietly reading. No. You see people walking around and running, laughing, playing with each other, shouting, and you have to describe that in your story. If you want to write about students sitting down reading, then okay, good. Maybe that is reflective or relevant to your story in some way. But whatever you want to write and whatever you are seeing in your mind, you have to write that on the paper, because the examiner cannot see what's in your mind. You might say the corridor, the student walked through the corridor during lunchtime. And well, that's all I see, and all I see is a student walking through an empty corridor, walking to the cafeteria to buy some food because it's lunchtime. That is how I imagine that sentence. But if you tell me the corridor was packed with students laughing, chatting, and hurrying to buy food before the bell rang, I could imagine now that, alright, students running around and laughing in the corridor, everybody talking loud, people running to the cafeteria because the bell about to ring. So when you describe your setting, your reader is able to imagine it. Our next example, a crowded taxi stand in San Fernando. So think about what the taxi standers look like or feel like or sound like. Noise. Right? You always hearing those taxi drivers shouting for passengers, telling you, we go in this place, we go in that place, $10 to go this place, so on. Busy streets, you're also going and be hearing cars driving, honking their horns. You're going and hear people talking and shouting loud. You're going to hear music playing. You're going to hear the taxis honking their horns, possible confusion or excitement by people running to get taxis to go to work or to go home, so on. So example sentences, at the San Fernando taxi stand, drivers shouted for passengers while horns blared and people squeezed through the crowd. So now we could visualize what the San Fernando taxi stand looks like, because we could imagine taxi drivers standing outside of their vehicles shouting for passengers. We could also imagine all the horns from all the vehicles nearby honking. We could also see people, when you see people squeeze through the crowd, we could imagine a big crowd of people and people here and there trying to squeeze through and walk through the crowd. Now, if we have a beach house late at night, we have darkness, silence or strange noises, waves crashing, mystery or fear. The nighttime in literature is used to create a sense of creepiness or spookiness or fear or mystery. You wouldn't use bright daylight, birds chirping, the wind blowing and the trees dancing and swaying in the wind to create an atmosphere of mystery and fear, because that just signifies a nice, happy, bright day, so something good happening. But if you want something dark and scary to happen, the atmosphere must also be dark and scary. Think of it as like a movie. When you have a horror movie, what color is the screen? You don't see no bright screens in a horror movie. You see darkness, you see the walls looking moldy and slimy, you feel scared because it's so dark and gloomy. Sometimes when you watch TV shows or movies, the screen would be so dark that you can't even see the characters. That is not what you're aiming for. But it creates the sense that it is a dark and gloomy movie. Something is supposed to happen. Something bad is supposed to happen. So our sentence is, the old beach house stood in darkness while the wind howled and waves crashed against the shore. So the words we use here, we use old beach house. An old house gives off the vibe that it is old and wooden. You have creaking floorboards or creaking doors. If something is old, it also gives the idea of fear or mystery or spookiness because it might have ghosts living there. It's existed for so many years. People may have died there. So many people pass through that house. It also standing in darkness. Darkness gives the vibe of fear. The wind howled. Howled is a word used with wolves, right? Because wolves howl. So if the wind is howling, it gives it a spookier vibe because you are comparing the wind to a wolf. And wolves are usually found in the forest, which is a scary area. Then the waves crashed against the shore. This is used to show that you're hearing, the wave, because you're at the beach house, right? So you have to have the waves at the beach house. And if you hear any waves crashing at shore at night, it might be scary. Now, how does the setting affect a story? So the setting could change the mood. If it is dark, it will feel scary and spooky. If it is a nice, bright, sunny day, it will indicate the story is happening and is a good story that's going to happen, something positive. It also indicates the type of events. If we look down here, a bright savannah on carnival morning may create a happy and energetic mood. If you're going to write about carnival celebrations, you're not going to write about no kind of dark, scary beach house. You're going to talk about how you're seeing all these bright colors, you're seeing all the colors of the paint and the powder, and everybody laughing and singing. You're hearing screams of joy. You're not going to hear screams of fear or cries of sadness. You're also going to hear all the music because they have loud music trucks. You're going to talk about all the sparkles on the costumes. You're going to talk about all the nice things that happen, right? So you're not going to start off carnival in a dark mood. You're going to start it off on a bright sunny day. It would also indicate the way the characters behave. If you have an empty house during a stormy night, your character's not going to be jumping up and dancing and having fun. They're going to be scared and meek and small and looking around the corner to see if it have any ghost or anybody hidden behind there. Nobody going to, if the house is dark and scary, you're not just going to pull open the cupboards or pull open the doors in the house real wildly. You're going to open it very slowly to see what is behind the doors, if anybody or anything is hidden there. So we have a good setting description. So a good setting uses descriptive words to describe what is happening so that your reader could imagine it as well. Example. A weak example or a weak sentence would be, the girl walked home. Okay, the girl walked home. Well, we don't know anything about that, so we don't know what happens if the girl just walks home. We can't imagine anything happening there. But if you say, the girl walked home along the muddy road in her village as the evening rain soaked her school uniform, we now know that it is rainy. We also know that it is supposed to be a dark and gloomy day or a dark and gloomy vibe or setting in the story. So the second example, meaning the second example here, is better because it gives us information about the place, which is the muddy road in the village, the weather, which is that it is raining. The time might be after school, right? Because it said she is the evening, right? Because they said it is the evening time, so she walking home from school. And clearer imagery. We could now have a better visualization of what the girl looks like and what the setting looks like when we use this whole section here to describe it. So we have some more examples of setting. We have a lot of examples so that when you go to write your story, you're not really stumbling to come up with anything. So, if you talk about the market in the early morning, you could say vendors arrange baskets of fruit as the smell of fresh bread and the sound of loud bargaining fill the market. When you go to the market, think about what you hear and what you see. You see people with fruits on the table. People might have baskets or bags with vegetables. You're smelling, well, sometimes you might smell fresh bread, you smell the vegetables, you might smell fish. You also don't just hear quietness, right? When you go into a market, it's never silent. It's always people talking loud, people yelling how much vegetables they have to sell, what the prices are, $5 a pound, things like that. So you have to describe that too. Then we also have a classroom on an examination day. So the classroom was silent except for the scratching of pens and the soft turning of pages. If it's an exam day, don't expect people talking loud and laughing and excited. It is a silent time. The only things that you will hear will be the pages turning or people writing on paper. If you have Maracas Beach on a sunny afternoon, you could write that the children ran across the hot sand whilst the blue sea shimmered under the bright afternoon sun. Since it is a sunny afternoon, you don't expect that you're going to write about the darkness and how the water grabbed the children and pulled them into the depths of the ocean or the scary beach house. No. Since it is a sunny afternoon, things need to be happening that are positive, or nice things should be happening in your story. Since it's sunny, you have hot sand because the sun might be hot, and the blue sea shimmered under the bright afternoon sun. When the sun is out, the sea might be shimmering. A lonely street at night. So the street was empty and still, with only a flickering lamppost lighting the cracked pavement. Imagine you walking home late at midnight by yourself in the road. That is not a nice, happy, fun time for you. That is a scary time, right? You don't know who watching you walk home in the streets. You don't know what is out there. As soon as you're alone, once it is dark, you feel that sense of fear. So you have to talk about how the street was empty. Everything is still means that there's no noises, you're not seeing any movement, you're not seeing any other people. The only things that you could see would be the flickering lamppost, and the fact that it is flickering adds more to the spooky vibe. If it was just a constant light, then alright, it doesn't feel as spooky, but flickering light indicates that the light could cut off and you could be in complete darkness. It could also indicate that maybe paranormal activity is happening because of the light flickering. It also indicates something unsteady or unstable is going to happen in the story. And the pavement is cracked. The cracked pavement adds more to the fact that it is a scary vibe as well because it is cracked. So when you have to write your story, your setting, ask yourself several questions. Where is the story taking place? When is it taking place? What is the weather like? What is the mood of the place? And what details might help you to imagine the scene? Whatever details help you to imagine the scene will also help your audience or your readers to imagine the scene. So it is necessary to add them into your story. Now we talk a lot about the setting. Let us move to the characters now. So in your story, you need to have characters, right? Your characters are basically the people or the animals or any imaginary beings in your story. If you're writing a story about a ghost, your ghost is a character. They are important because they are the things that make your story happen. Without them, they would have no actions, no problems, no feelings, no decisions to make. A good character in a story should always feel real and believable. Your character shouldn't be brave alone. Your character needs to experience other emotions. They cannot be depressed alone. They have to be happy at some points. Even if your story is a fictional story, you cannot write, you should not write about somebody who is happy all the time. Having some kind of problem is what gives your story body or liveliness. The readers should also be able to understand the characters' personalities, their actions, feelings, and reasons for behaving in a certain way. If we have a character who is happy all the time, and one day we see that they just jump up and kill somebody, and you have no explanations for that whatsoever, we will not understand why that happened. So you need to give them some reason for that happening. You need to describe the characters and maybe the internal conflict as to what led to them wanting to kill people. Now, what the reader should understand about a character is who they are. So this is the basic information about the character, like the name, the age, their role in the story, their relationship to the other characters. When they say age, you don't have to say my character is 15 years old or John who is 16 years old. We just need to be able to know our range. If you write about a character who writes in the CSEC exam, we know that our student, that character is somewhere between 16 and 18, unless you want to specify as an adult. If the character is working somewhere, then we know the character is not a 5-year-old child. If the character is playing in a playground that is meant for children, then we know it's not an adult you're writing about. So we just need to know something related to the age. Also their role in the story. So who are they? Is it that they are the main character, the supporting characters? Who are they? What do they do? Why are they in the story? You can't write a character and have them have no role in your story. If your character's role, sometimes students write stories where you have 5 characters in a friends group because they have 5 friends in a friend group in real life. So you feel like you need to write all your friends in the story and give everybody some role. But if you only have 400 to 450 words to write, you cannot write 5 characters in a friend group in your story. You will not have enough words to give every person a purpose and even dialogue. One person, their purpose might end up just being a non-existent character who is named and they just come in to say hello, how you going, once in your story. That character could be written out, they have no purpose in your story anymore. And your relationship to other characters. So is your character an antagonist, meaning they are there to go against the main character and cause the problems? If that is the case, they are important because they help the story to move forward. So we have an example here. Anaya is a 15-year-old student from San Fernando who lives with her grandmother and is preparing for exams. So now we know who she is, meaning we know she is Anaya, we know she's 15, we know she's from San Fernando, we know she's preparing for exams. We could also just say Anaya lives with her grandmother and is preparing for exams. If we say CSEC exams, we would know she's about 15. We also must know how the character behaves. So this means telling us about the character's personality and attitude. So for example, your character might be kind or brave or jealous or hardworking. So you need to state that in your story. But you cannot just outright state Anaya is hardworking, Anaya is brave. That is very flat and 2D. Nobody wants to be told things like that. I must be able to decipher or figure out what your character's personality is based on what you write in your story. So if you say, although Anaya was tired after school, she still helped her grandmother prepare dinner before studying, it shows that she is now responsible and caring. Because although she is tired, she is thinking about other people. The other person is her grandmother. Her grandmother has a purpose in the story as well. Her grandmother's purpose is to reveal Anaya's personality traits, which is that she is responsible and caring. If we didn't have the grandmother in the story, we would not have known that she is responsible and caring, because then it wouldn't have anybody for Anaya to help her. So although the grandmother is not the main character, she is still very important there. And it is very important to show the qualities, not state the qualities. Another thing too is that the characters must also want something. The reader must know what the character wants. This gives the story some kind of direction or tells the reader what is going to happen in the story. So maybe the character wants to pass an exam or win a competition. Maybe they want to protect someone or prove themselves to somebody. Maybe they have a problem to solve, or they have to escape some form of danger. Or maybe they just need to make their parents proud. So an example is, Anaya wanted to pass her CSEC exam so she could earn a scholarship and make her grandmother proud. So this helps reader to understand her motivation. Her motivation is, well, what does she want to do? She wants to pass her CSEC exams. And she wants to earn a scholarship. And what is her motivation for that? Making her grandmother proud. She obviously would want to have academic success and all of that. But her main motivation is making the grandmother proud. And by telling the readers that, we now understand, well, she also cares about the grandmother a lot. If she wants to make her proud, it means that she seeks validation from the grandmother. You must also talk about how your characters react to problems. So a story becomes interesting when the characters face problems. The way a character reacts shows their true personality. For example, a brave character might face a problem. They will never run away from it. If your character is brave and somebody tries to rob them, they wouldn't turn around and just run away. They might face that person, fight them, pull out their own gun and shoot them. A cowardly character may run away. So if you want to show your character is cowardly, when you have some kind of danger, then your character will run away. A dishonest character would lie. If Anaya is dishonest, when the grandmother asks her, well, where are my letters? Anaya might lie and say, I don't know, I have never seen them. A mature character might ask for help. If Anaya is a mature character and she is experiencing some kind of hardship, she will seek help from others. If she is selfish, she might blame other people for things, or she might only seek things that are in her best interests, not doing things for other people. So example, when Anaya lost her notes 2 weeks before the exam, she cried at first, but then she asked her teacher for help and made a new study plan. So she lost the notes and she cried. So yes, she was very stressed and frustrated and worried, and nothing is wrong with that. Your character does not have to be brave and strong at all times, because no real human is like that. Every real life human will have some moment where they cry or show some form of weakness, and that is how you make your characters in your story realistic. You need to show what their weaknesses are, and if they are a strong character, you also have to show how they overcome that weakness. So right now, Anaya's weakness is that she lost the notes and she is crying, but her strength is that she put that aside and she asked for help from the relevant persons, which is the teacher, and she used that to make a whole new study plan. So she is determined to pass the exam despite experiencing some form of weakness. Now we have the different types of characters that students should know. So we have the main character. This is the person who the story mostly focuses on. The character usually faces a problem. So for example, we have that Anaya is the main character because the story is about her exam struggle. Then we have that the minor characters are the other people in the story. They support the plot but are not really the main focus. They just help the story to move forward without actually being in the spotlight. So for example, Anaya's grandmother. She is there to show how Anaya is strong and brave and helpful. The teacher is there to show how Anaya is determined and also how she is mature because there is somebody for her to ask for help. And the best friend. We're not sure about the best friend right now, but maybe the best friend in the story shows that maybe there is a character, maybe the best friend in the story actually stole the notes. So now the best friend is the person who's the antagonist in the story. She thinks that it is her best friend, but in reality it is just somebody who's trying to sabotage her and make her fail. So that person now becomes the antagonist, who is the character who forces or creates difficulty for the main character. So the best friend is also important in the story. Right. So then we change classmate to best friend here. Right. Now let's talk about how to create believable characters. So to make a character believable, don't just say what they are like. So don't just say Anaya was kind. Show it. This is like what we were talking about earlier. So if you say she noticed the young boy standing alone in the rain, so she shared her umbrella with him, that shows she is kind. So don't ever show that don't ever state that she was kind. It's like real life. You don't go around telling people I am a kind person. I am a very nice person. No, you don't do that. That seems very weird. That just kind of coming across as though you're tooting your own horn. What you have to do is show people that you are kind and nice. Do things to demonstrate that by helping people or seeking out things in other people's best interests. So same thing when you're writing a story. Don't tell people that your character is nice and kind. Show it to them. So an exam tip is that when you're writing a story, make sure your main character has 3 things: a clear personality, a clear problem to face, and a clear reaction to that problem. So an example is, Jaden was a quiet but hardworking boy who wanted to win the school's debating competition. When his notes were destroyed the night before the finals, he panicked. But instead of giving up, he practiced from memory and asked his sister to help him. So we have a personality. He is hardworking and he wanted to win the school's debating competition, right? This is his want, winning the debating competition. His problem is that his notes were destroyed the night before the finals and he panicked. His reaction is that he panicked. But his reaction is also that he didn't give up. And this one also falls into his personality. He is not somebody who just gives up. He is somebody who's hardworking. So we have to demonstrate that now. Instead of continuing to cry and stress and just say, done away with the exam, done away with the debating competition, he decided he would practice from memory the debate that he had. And he also asked his sister to help him. So he is hardworking in the sense that he didn't let losing the notes falter him. He put things in place to do his best still. Now you must have some kind of conflict in your story, right? Your conflict is the main problem, your struggle, or your difficulty in a story. It is what makes the story interesting because the character has something to face, something to solve, overcome, or survive. Without the conflict, the story may feel flat because nothing important is happening. So if you just write about a series of nice events or good events, like I went to the beach and we play with the beach balls, we play in the water, we play in the sand, we eat some nice food, then we went to the mall and we play in Galactica and we eat some KFC, then we went home and it was such a nice day. Your story is very boring. Nobody wants to read about that. Everybody wants to read about some kind of problem or struggle that makes your story exciting because you must want to know what happens next in your story. So your conflict helps to create suspense, reveal something about the character's personality, move the plot forward, teach a lesson or a message, or make the reader want to know what happens next. So for example, if the student just simply goes to school and comes home, nothing exciting is happening there. But if the student goes to school and is accused, and loses an important assignment, but is accused of cheating or must speak in front of the school, then the story becomes interesting there. You have various types of conflict. We have person versus person. So this is where another character is creating a problem for you. So it might involve 2 characters arguing, an ex-character bullying your character, a character is jealous of someone, there is rivalry between 2 characters, somebody betrays someone, or there's a misunderstanding between 2 people. For example, Keisha and her best friend stopped speaking after Keisha discovered that her friend had shared her secret with the whole class. So this is a person versus person conflict. Her friend is the person causing the conflict in the story. Then you have person versus self. This is when the main character struggles with their own mind or their own heart or their own internal problems. So maybe they are afraid of something. They might be guilty, ashamed, indecisive of what to do. They might have low confidence or even temptation to do something that they should not be doing. For example, Malik wanted to tell the truth about breaking the classroom window, but he was afraid his parents would be disappointed. So he is indecisive and feeling fear and guilt. He wants to talk about the window, but he is indecisive as to what he should do because he is afraid that his parents will be disappointed. So he is just struggling internally. Now we have person versus nature. So this is when the character struggles against the natural forces of the environment. So it might be like a flood, a storm, a hurricane, earthquake, a dangerous animal, a rough sea, extreme heat. So anything related to the environment is this. During heavy rainfall, the river rose quickly, trapping Maya and her younger brother on the wrong side of the bridge. So they are battling the river. The river is part of the natural environment or part of the natural forces. So it's not a next person trapping them, somebody not standing up on the bridge and telling them, look, you can't pass. They also not battling something internal, so they're not battling whether they should cross or not. They're battling the nature. Nature is preventing them from crossing. So you could also have things like that. Then you have person versus society. So this is when the character struggles against the rules, expectations, the pressure, or the unfair treatment in society. Maybe it might be about the unfair school rules, poverty, discrimination, peer pressure, family expectations, or community judgment. For example, although Daniel wanted to become an artist, everyone in his family pressured him to study medicine because they believed art was not a real career. So this creates conflict because Daniel must choose between his dream and society's expectations. Society in this story does not expect anybody to become an artist or does not see art as a career. You must do something more solid, like maybe, I don't know, right, like they said, to study medicine, become a doctor instead. So you don't really have to you're not going to put all those types of conflict in your story, right? You only have 400 to 450 words. Those are just different options that you could choose from. But a good story usually only has one main conflict. You have, it should be clear early in your story so the reader understands what the character is facing. A strong conflict should answer the question, what problem is stopping the character from getting what they want? For example, Tia wanted to win the school's poetry competition, but she was terrified of speaking in public. So, it is clear what Tia wants to do, but it is also clear what is preventing her from getting it. So you should state your conflict from early. Now, you also have something called point of view in your story. Point of view is the perspective from which the story is told. This just means it is telling us who is narrating the story or who is the narrator, and this determines how much the reader is allowed to know. You should just ask yourself who is telling the story. That is all. So first person point of view, first person perspective means that your character is the character inside the story or that the narrator is on the inside. The story would use pronouns like I, me, my, we, us, and our. It tells the events from a very personal experience. So for example, I stood at the gate gripping my report book tightly. My heart pounded as I waited for my mother to arrive. So you're talking about things from your perspective. You, the person writing the story, is inside of the story. So because of this, you are able to describe all the characters' internal feelings, internal wants, internal desires, internal struggles. So your readers are able to know almost everything about the character. But this also means that you can't really write those things about the other characters. If you have John as a next character, you can write about John's internal struggles and John's personal feelings because you are the narrator inside of the story. You only know what's going on inside your head. You don't know what's going on inside John's head. It would be very unrealistic if you're writing a first person perspective and you start writing inside of John's head, because we realistically cannot see that. Think of it as real life once again. When you're walking through the world, you only know what's going on in your head. You only know about your problems. You only know about your struggles and your happiness and your experiences. You don't know about a random man who walking through the road next to you. Maybe the person is your friend, yeah? You know about your friend, you know about the problems and so on, but you don't truly know what's going on in their head. So it would be unrealistic to just write about every single thing that's going on with you, to write about that with somebody else. So this first person is often easier in CSEC because you can write it as if you are personally experiencing the event. It also helps the students to include your feelings, your thoughts, your health, your fear, your guilt, excitement, reflection, and any personal lessons that you may have learned from the story. From the experiences in the story. Example, I wanted to run but my legs felt weaker. If you're writing about this, you can't write that John want to run and John legs feeling weaker, because you don't know that. You only know that you want to run and your legs feeling weaker. I knew I had made a terrible mistake and I now had to face the consequences. In a first person perspective story, you only know that about yourself or your main character. You don't know that about John's character. So this sounds more emotional and personal, which is why people tend to write first person stories more. A third person story, on the other hand, is where the narrator is not inside the story. The narrator is outside of the story and talks about all the characters equally. So they would never use I this and I that, or we, us, me, no. They will always use he, she, they, him, her, and them, right? So we are only aware of what is going on. We know what goes on with all the characters. So for example, Jaden stood at the gate gripping his report book tightly. His heart pounded as he waited for his mother to arrive. When you want to write about the minds and the actions and the experiences of all the characters in the story, now this is the perspective you're writing from. You could write from third person and talk about everybody's personal experiences. You could talk about what's going on in John head and John heart and Jack head and heart and everybody head and heart when you're writing from third person perspective. Because you could think of it as though you are like the God or the creator on the outside, and there's a little world inside your book, and you are determining what is going on with every character. Think about it like Sims. When you're playing Sims, you could determine who going and eat, who going and sleep. You could see what's going on with each character. So you could tell which character feeling happy, which one feeling stressed, which one feeling frustrated. You could also see why each character feeling like that. Because you are the creator on the outside looking in. So third person is when you are the creator and you could write about everybody. First person is when you are on the inside and you could only write about yourself. Third person, it is simple to write, but people don't really write it that much because they might end up writing too many characters and it might feel very overwhelming to have to give every character emotions and feelings. But that is not to deter you from writing that. Write it if that is the best route for your story and what you are most comfortable with. Everyone has a style of writing that is most comfortable or suitable for them. Personally, mine is first person because I like to write from my perspective and like I am the character in the story. But you can write from anything you want. There's also the second person, but don't write from that, especially in CSEC. That is when you're referring to the characters as you. So you walk to the beach, you open your bag. It's a very odd perspective and you usually only see it in fan fiction. When you're writing like One Direction or BTS and all of them, you tend to see Y/N for your name. So let me say Zayn Malik said YN, how are you? So he's saying Jennifer, how are you? If your name is Jennifer. But you don't write that for like CSEC. Now we're going to talk about what the examiner is really looking for in the CSEC narrative writing. So they usually reward things like having a clear relevance to the topic. So your story must be relevant. Logical sequence of events, where we talked about this at the beginning already, right? The ending must be satisfying. You must have an effective climax. You must develop the suspense or tension. You must have accurate grammar and so on, varied vocabulary. You can't be saying she said, he said, they said for the whole story. You must use different words for the words said. You can't say she felt, he felt, they felt. You have to use different words. Don't ever write back the same word. Also, to just say she said this is boring. Talk about how she said it. If the girl feeling sad, don't say she said, I want my mommy. Right? Say she cried, I want my mommy. If somebody is angry, don't just say he said, where are the keys to my car? No, use different words to describe his anger, to show that he is angry. Say he bellowed, "Where are my keys?" Right? To show it. Don't ever say the word said in a story. Sentence variety, right? Creativity without becoming unrealistic or confusing, right? Things they do not want. They do not want memorized stories that do not match the topic. In SEA, some teachers used to teach children the children a particular story and tell them, okay, if this topic ever come, we're going to rewrite the story. And what SEA realized is that, well, all the children writing the same story, so how is that? Can't be that they copying each other. No, it's because teachers teaching the children a template to write the story. Don't do that. Don't go on the internet and memorize a story. Write an original story. You can rewrite a movie though. If you watch Fast and Furious last night and you go in your exam and the story is about, let me say, a police chase, you can write about Fast and Furious, you can write about Harry Potter, you can write about anything you want. Just don't make it be that you memorize a story word for word and you come to write it in your exam. Because they will know, because they would have seen it somewhere before. Now, they also don't like long, slow introductions with nothing happening. If you're just describing the scene in your introduction and you're wasting all your words there, then you're wasting your time. Because you only really have 400 to 450 words and you don't have that much time to write your story either. You also don't want it to take too long to get to what happening. When you watching a movie or a TV show, if the beginning going so long that it getting so boring, you just really want to watch it anymore, right? You want that the events start to happen fast. You want to know what is the problem, what is the excitement, what is the point of the movie I am watching. What I do is I give a movie 15 minutes. If it doesn't entice me within that 15 minutes, I change it one time. If it is boring for the whole 15 minutes, then I will not waste time watching the rest of the movie. They will do that to you in the exam. If you spend your whole first paragraph talking about boring nonsense, they will not continue to read your story. They will just say, okay, well, that's a boring story, mark that down. Too many characters. You cannot write 10 characters into 400 words. You don't have enough words and enough time to give each character a purpose. Choose the least amount of characters that you could possibly have in your story. Give each character a purpose. Weak endings. Don't just drop off and say, okay, the end. You have to resolve all your issues at the end of your story. Too much dialogue with little narration. If your story is just, she said, I am going to the market. Her mother responded, okay, buy me tomatoes. The girl responded, okay, mom, I am going now. The mother said, alright, darling, be safe. The girl was walking to the market. When she reached the market, she asked the vendor, how many for the tomatoes? And that is just your whole story. There is just dialogue. You will lose marks. At the end of the day, it is a narrative. The word narrative means you are narrating what is going on. So you have to put narration. Dialogue is very important and you have to put dialogue, but you need to put it in places where it is important. The whole scenario with going to the market, that is not necessary to have so much dialogue there. Every time a character says something, it must have a purpose. Confusing time shifts. If you're writing the story right now in present day, and then you just jump to the future, and then you just jump to the past, without indicating what each time shift is or why, or giving it a purpose to move between the times, it will just be confusing. And also, regarding that, it is very difficult to write different time shifts into your story in terms of the tense that you're using. Your story must always be in past tense. You can't write future tense and present tense and all of that in your story. So I would suggest, if story writing is not your strongest point, don't try to take on any kind of difficult techniques. Write the simplest story possible. Make it enticing, but don't try to write anything too extravagant and difficult in your story. Overuse of slang. Remember, the end of the day, your story have to be written in standard English. The only locations where you're able to put in dialect or slang is in your dialogue. If the slang is not relevant, don't write it in. If you want to show a character is from a particular location, so you're writing some slang from that location in your dialogue, then yes, that is exactly what you should be doing. If you want to show me that somebody is from Trinidad, like the south of Trinidad, so when the person using dialogue, instead of saying she is constantly eating food, they say she's steady eating food, so you use a word from the south. Good, that is what you have to do. But if you're just using slang in every single sentence or everywhere you could find, then it will seem like you don't know standard English. Unrealistic plot twists and no build-up. If you write a plot twist like you're going to write an exam, when you reach the exam room, you realize your teacher is not a human anymore, they are a snake. Then that is a very unrealistic plot twist. That is not what the reader is expecting. The reader is expecting that you go to your exam and you write your exam. So, if you want that your story turns out where your teacher is a snake, something must indicate that something like that is going to happen. You can't just turn your story around and write that as a plot twist. It comes across as very weird and very unrealistic. So don't write that. So just a simple narrative structure for the CSEC exam is when you write your first paragraph, the opening of your story, try to grab your reader's attention as much as possible. Also try to introduce the narrator or whoever the main character is. Also establish the setting of your story. Give a hint that something is wrong or unusual. Because you have to start your story, right? You don't have that many words. Now, paragraph 2, build it up. Show that the normal situation is changing into something else, to something, whatever the problem is. Introduce the conflict here. Begin to show tension. Then, for your third paragraph, show rise in action. So here, make the problem more serious. Show the emotions, reactions, and obstacles in the story. Keep your reader interested. The climax is the biggest moment of tension. Here an important decision is being made, or a discovery is being made, or a confrontation is being made. The resolution is the end. So show what happened after the climax now. Reveal the lesson, the consequence, or the change, and end your story strongly. So, my experience with teaching students narrative and reading different papers, reading students' papers, the hardest part is starting your story. So some ways, or a few ways you can start your story is to start it with some kind of action taking place. For example, the scream shattered the silence just as I reached the classroom door. So that is an action. The scream is an action. Me walking to the classroom door is an action. This works because, immediate interest. We want to know why somebody's screaming. Why is there screaming in the classroom? And if it is shattering the silence, it is also indicating that there is no other noise going on. So why is there all of a sudden screaming? You could also start off with dialogue. So, example, don't open that gate, my brother shouted, but it was already too late. So it creates tension. Why should the gate not be open? What is it? What is behind the gate? What is it? Why is it closed? It sounds natural and dramatic as well, right? Natural in terms of dialogue. Somebody is talking. You usually see movies starting off like that. You could also start off with a vivid description. So the sky hung low and grey over the village, and the drains were already spilling onto the road. So you start off by describing a hurricane or a flood. By using description, you're setting the mood. So we know now it's not a happy, cheery kind of mood because it is grey, the sky hanging low and grey, the drains flooding out. So it creating the atmosphere of something dark and gloomy going to happen. You could also start off with a shocking statement. Example, I had never stolen anything before that Friday afternoon. Well, that's a shock because if you never stole anything before and all of a sudden you're stealing something that had to be a problem in some way. Something had to have caused that. So your reader is now curious as to what could possibly cause that. So we want to know what is going on. You could also start in the middle of an important moment. By the time I realized I was lost, the last taxi had already left. So you're starting in the middle of the problem here, the middle of the story basically. And it avoids the boring introduction. So it avoids starting at the beginning and introducing everything. You're starting directly in the middle of the problem. And it goes straight into the problem. Yeah. You see a lot of movies using these techniques. So the techniques that you see movies using, you could use them in your stories as well. You could start with a flashback. You could start your story normal and then move into a flashback. If you know how to do the technique, then yes, that's good. Now you also need to know how to develop the middle of your story, because this is where the students tend to lose marks, as your story would start off nice and exciting, then you just kind of get bored, or you're just not really sure what to write in the middle of your story. So some ways that you could keep your story exciting in the middle is to keep introducing complications. If you realize you have plenty words to use still and you have very little things going on in your story, you could just keep introducing more complications. But you have to remember that every complication you arise in the story, you must resolve. Show the feelings and the thoughts of your characters. If the event happening is a robbery, let your characters express how they feel. Maybe they're feeling scared, maybe their heart pounding. Things like that would take up your words. It would also make it more suspenseful, and your readers would also feel the emotions of your characters. Use descriptive details. So describe what is going on. Use adjectives. Let events build naturally. Make each event lead to the next event. So show the connections and the linkages between the events. You could ask yourself several questions. What goes wrong? Why does it matter? How does the character react? What makes the situation worse? And what choice must the character make? So if you don't know what to write in the middle of your story, ask yourself these questions based on what already happened in your story and move from there. Now you need to write the climax of your story. This is the turning point, and it should be the most intense part of your story. So some examples of climaxes might be that the child is a lost child is finally found, the truth is revealed, the character confesses, the storm destroys the bridge, the main character makes a brave decision, the thief is caught, the exam results are announced. So a weak climax will just feel boring after a long build-up, but a good climax should feel important. It should feel like something has been solved, or it explodes the main conflict. It also affects the character deeply. Now after you write all that, it might be difficult to end your story. 3 types of endings that you could use would be lessons learned. So for example, from that day forward, I understood that one careless decision could change everything. You could also have an emotional ending. As my mother hugged me tightly, I realized how close I had come to trusting her forever. I had come to losing her trust forever. Or a reflective ending. Even now, whenever rain drums on the roof, I remember that terrifying night. So that's just some examples. Now some language techniques you should use in your story. Use sensory details. So always ask yourself, what do my characters see, hear, smell, touch, or taste? And write based on that. So for example, the smell of wet earth rose from the field as thunder rolled in the distance. When you write this, your readers are able to smell the wet earth. We are also able to hear the thunder. So we feel like we are actually in the story. It's just like when you're watching a movie and you're hearing the thunder in the movie and you're seeing all the colors on the walls and things. You feel like you're in the movie too. That is what you want your readers to experience when you write a story. You also have figurative language. So use it carefully, don't overuse it. So this is just where you use different literary devices like similes, metaphors, personifications, hyperboles. So you could say her hands shook like leaves in the wind to describe that she was feeling nervous or scared. Fear was a knot in my stomach to show that you're feeling scared. The wind howled through the trees to create the atmosphere of something spooky and creepy. My heart nearly burst from my chest to describe that your heart was pounding, or you felt so much joy and happiness or love. Now let's talk about the dialogue. So the dialogue is there to make your story lively, but once again, do not let it take over your story. Do not write unnecessary dialogue. Your dialogue is meant to just reveal the characters, reveal different things about your characters, create tension in your story, and move the story forward. It should not be long and pointless conversation. So do not write, "Hi, hello, how you going? I am fine. How are you? I am fine. How is your mother? She is fine." Don't write that. Unrealistic speech. That section of conversation there is unrealistic as well. Don't write that. Too much slang. Don't write anything unnecessary. Sentence variety. You need to use a mix of long and short sentences in your whole story. A short sentence could just be "I froze." This adds suspense and tension. A longer sentence might be, "Although the crowd continued moving around me, I felt rooted to the pavement, unable to think clearly." Right, so that's a long sentence. So when you have a combination of long and short sentences, it creates more rhythm and interest in your story. If you only have long sentences, it might feel kind of boring, and your readers might feel like you're taking long to get to whatever is happening in your story. You might get confused. But if you only have short sentences, it might seem like your story is too suspenseful, or it's just getting boring at that point, and it's sounding choppy and disconnected, and not understanding the connections between the different events in your story. So if you write a combination of both, there will be a good balance in your story. Now you should also use strong verbs. So don't say, "She went to the market." If she went to the market and she was rushing, say, "She hurried to the market." If you are writing about being in a haunted house, don't say, "She went to the next room." Say, "She crept around the corner looking through the door to the next room." Don't say, "She said this, he said this, they said this." Describe how they said it. So whispered, muttered, shouted. Don't say, "She looked through the window." Maybe she glanced through the window, or she peered through the window. So use strong verbs in your story to describe how different actions are being done. This way you could describe the events in your story without actually having to write, without writing the words "went and said and looked" and taking up space by that. So use past tense. We have that. Don't just jump between past tense and present tense. So it is wrong to say, "I opened the door and see my friend crying." That overall is not standard English too, right? That is incorrect grammar. You have to say, "I opened the door and saw my friend crying." So don't mix up your tenses. Now I have some useful vocabulary here. You could find many more words online. If you want to describe fear, you could use words like terrified, panic-stricken, uneasy, nervous, alarmed. To describe happiness in your story, delighted, overjoyed, relieved, excited. To describe sadness, heartbroken, disappointed, regretful. Anger, furious, frustrated, outraged. Strong action verbs. So she dashed around the corner. She snatched the bag from the man's hand. She hesitated before stepping into the kitchen. He collapsed, grasping his heart. So use action verbs. Words for sequencing. At first I was unsure of what to do, and suddenly the man came out of nowhere. In the end, I realized everything was fine. So use words to show sequence in your story. We're almost done, don't worry. So different expressions you could use. They have many more expressions. I will send a document on many more that you could use. So you could say, "My mind raced." If you have a lot going on in your mind, you could say, "My mind raced." It shows that your character is feeling anxious, or some kind of thing is affecting them. It was a moment I would never forget. Little did I know this was going to happen. So that's different phrases. Now I have full model paragraph examples here. So you can have a descriptive opening. The school compound was unusually quiet that Friday evening. The last of the students had already left, and only the distant scrape of chairs and the hum of the security light broke the silence. As I hurried across the empty courtyard with my bag clutched to my chest, I could not shake the strange feeling that someone was watching me. So you're describing the scene here. This whole thing was just description of the scene. You could also have rise in action in your story. So I told myself I was being foolish, yet my steps became faster. Behind me I heard it again, the soft crunch of gravel. I spun around, but the pathway was empty. My mouth went dry. By then, the stories I had laughed at earlier that day no longer seemed ridiculous. So you're describing the action in the story. The action is the person becoming more and more anxious and paranoid. We also have climax. Just as I reached the gate, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the compound, and before I could scream, a figure rushed toward me from the shadows. I stumbled backward, my bag slipped from my shoulder, and braced myself for the worst. So this is the climax. This is the highest point of action or the most tension in the story. And then the resolution. Relax, it's me, a familiar voice said. So we have dialogue there. It was only my brother, sent by my mother to walk me home. Relief flooded through me so quickly that my knees nearly gave way. Although I laughed afterward, I never again stayed back at school without letting someone know. So the resolution is where you just resolve the problem. The problem is the person was scared and paranoid, thinking somebody was watching them and following them. And the resolution is that the person following them is just a sibling. So how to add suspense in your story? You could create suspense by delaying the important information, taking long to give it, but you don't want to take so long that your readers get bored. You also want to use short sentences at the tense moments. So for example, when they said, somewhere they said it. Oh, right here. My mouth went dry. That is a very short sentence, so it adds suspense to the story. Describing the sounds and the movements, show the characters fear and uncertainty, hinting that something bad may happen, or ending paragraphs at dramatic moments. Example, the door creaked open slowly. I held my breath, someone was inside. So you're delaying the information of who is the person inside. We don't know who is inside, so it is creating suspense, whether it's a good person or a bad person. And lastly, we have dialogue rules. Correct punctuation matters, because remember, punctuation is what you're getting marked on. Where are you going? My mother asked. Notice where all the punctuation is in that sentence. You have your quotation marks, double quotation marks around your dialogue. This is around what the person is saying. It is not around the part that says my mother asked, because that is not dialogue. That is narration. You have a question mark because that is a question. You have a full stop at the end. The sentence has ended. If you say, I'll be back soon, I replied, you put a comma to show that that is the end of the sentence. If the speech comes first, so for example, run, Jason shouted, you put your quotation mark there. Sorry, you put quotation marks, you put your exclamation mark. But if the reporting clause or the narration comes first, so Jason shouted run, after shouted, you're going to put a comma, and then you're going to put your quotation marks and start your dialogue. And something to remember is anytime you have a new person in your story speaking, start a new paragraph. Even if this person has already been introduced, once it is that person is now talking in that paragraph for the first time, start a new dialogue. So let me see if I could find an example of that to show to you. Sorry, the page is just taking a little while. So we're coming over here now, right? Alright, so I know we didn't go through this story, but I will make a video describing it or explaining it. I just wanted to show you this bit with the dialogue before we end off, because I know it's getting late and we have about 5 minutes again, because I know we start the session late. So everybody move is dialogue. Uncle Ravi is talking there. Now hold on, I cried. I am a new person, so I am starting a new paragraph. The boy clung to me, shivering violently. My mother, he whispered. This is a new person speaking, so you have to switch paragraphs there. Then Uncle Ravi has come to speak again, so he needs to have a new paragraph. Although he was introduced previously in his story, he is once you have a different character speaking in your story, you must switch it back. You must switch your paragraphs. You cannot have two different characters speaking in the same paragraph. It just goes against the rules of story writing. Every time something new happens in your story, you must change your paragraphs. Alright, so that brings us to the end on our notes on narrative writing.